Have you ever felt so tired you just wanted to disappear? Not because you failed, but because you tried too hard, for too long, in a life that no longer felt like yours. This is the story of someone like that, Jack Morgan, a man who had everything until one moment broke it all. But sometimes losing everything is the only way to find something real. Not another title, not redemption, just a quieter kind of life. This is where the noise stops, a journey away from the noise toward what matters most. Part 1. The Collapse. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. New York, 4:03 a.m. The sky was still black, the city still asleep. But on the 49th floor of a glass tower at Park and 47th, Jack Morgan had already been awake for hours. No alarm, no dreams. Just the cold blue light of his phone screen casting a sharp edge across his unshaven jaw. He wasn't sure how long he'd been scrolling, how many emails from Europe he'd half read, or how many financial updates he'd marked later. His eyes ached, his hands felt tight, but his mind hadn't stopped moving. A message from the CFO. Still no word from the FDA. Expect 48 hours delay. Jack set the phone down on the nightstand. A small action, but it landed like a stone down an empty well. No echo. He wasn't angry, wasn't worried, just numb. 6:15 a.m. Coffee dripped into the machine, slow and steady. The kitchen around him looked more like a lab, polished, minimal, untouched. Jack slipped on a charcoal gray suit, fastened his Omega watch, adjusted the collar. No one looked at him in the mirror but himself, and even there, his eyes didn't hold focus. He sipped espresso, black, no sugar. Opened his phone. Calendar blocks filled the screen like a battlefield. 8 o'clock, performance review. 9:30, Tokyo investor call. 11 o'clock, legal consult. 1300, lunch 15 minutes. Only 7:30 p.m. remained uncolored, marked in gray. Dinner, Claire. No hearts, no emojis, no reminders, just another line in the grid. Claire called at 6:42.
You're up already?
Yeah,
You didn't sleep.
didn't need to.
I booked 11 Madison for tonight, 7:30. I invited the Japan exec too. Hope that's okay.
I'll be on time. Business formal?
Of course.
All right.
Silence. Then the soft clink of her coffee mug.
Jack,
Hmm?
never mind. See you tonight.
He ended the call, set the phone down, stared out the window. The city was starting to stir. He wasn't. The Apex Neural offices on the 48th floor were everything Jack had built. Efficient, sleek, silent. Glass walls, clean lines. People walking quickly, speaking little. The 9 o'clock meeting lasted exactly 26 minutes. Jack presented the post-op AI update like a surgeon. Sharp, clean, precise. Charts loaded on cue. Staff nodded in sync. No one said, "Great job." They didn't need to. Jack Morgan was assumed excellence. That evening, 11 Madison Park glowed with soft, careful light. Claire arrived 5 minutes early, as always. Hair up, black dress, perfume barely there, like a scent trying not to be remembered. Claire asked,
Any word from the FDA?
Not yet.
Frustrating.
Predictable?
They ordered, talked briefly about work, a merger, a lawsuit. They laughed, once, and the sound died too quickly. Then Claire set her wine glass down.
I'm thinking of taking the London offer. 6 months.
Sounds like a good challenge.
What do you think?
If it works for you, go.
She looked at him for a long second, then smiled. Not warm, not cold, just tired.
You know, Jack, I used to think success would make you lighter, but it's only made you heavier.
He didn't answer. And that was the answer. Later that night, Jack returned to the apartment, took off his suit, showered in silence, tried to remember the last time he laughed without calculating the cost. On the screen, a new email from PR. Forbes wants a quote on AI ethics in medicine. He hit delete, then lay down. The city still pulsed with light and life, but inside Jack Morgan, something had already started to crack. Chapter 2. The Crash. 6:32 a.m. The news alert hit Jack's phone just as he was finishing his third espresso. He scanned the headline without much thought, until one word pulled him up short. Patient dies after using Apex Neural's post-op AI system. He stared, blinked, then tapped. A 63-year-old woman in Boston died after her medication pump misfired, allegedly due to faulty scheduling from the AI assistant developed by Apex Neural Technologies. The hospital is launching a full review. For a second, he couldn't feel the coffee cup in his hand. It just sat there, warm, weightless, while his mind tried to process the words. He read the article again, and again, then opened his email. 37 unread messages. 6 subject lines included the word urgent. 2 said legal. 1 simply said, "We need to talk. Linda." 6:32 a.m. 9:12 a.m. The 48th floor boardroom was unusually quiet. No coffee, no jokes, just tension, pressed into the glass walls like heat trapped in a sealed room. Jack walked in. No one stood. No one greeted him. Gary, the CTO, was presenting a timeline. Linda, the COO, was flipping through risk assessments. Ethan, his old friend, his CFO, didn't look up. Jack walked to the head of the table, hands resting flat on the wood, voice steady but clipped.
We need to get in front of this. The system didn't fail. The nurse didn't input vitals post-surgery. That's not on the software.
Silence. Linda didn't raise her eyes.
The public doesn't care about fault, Jack. They care who they can point a finger at.
Jack frowned.
Then let them point it at me. I'll hold the press conference. I'll take responsibility.
Gary finally looked up, his face unreadable.
You won't.
Jack blinked.
Excuse me?
The board met this morning. Without you.
Jack's voice dropped an octave.
Why?
Gary exchanged a glance with Linda, then answered.
You're not helping, Jack. Right now, you're the story, and not the kind we can survive.
2 p.m. The official statement went out. Effective immediately, Jack Morgan will step down as CEO of Apex Neural Technologies. We thank him for his leadership and vision. One line, no context, no defense. His inbox flooded with news requests. CNBC wanted a quote. Reuters asked for an exclusive. TechCrunch just wrote, "Fall of a giant?" Jack didn't reply. He just sat in his glass-walled office, blinds drawn for the first time in 5 years, staring out at a city too busy to notice him unraveling. That night, Claire came over. She didn't take off her coat, didn't sit, just stood in the doorway, still, quiet, and already half gone in her eyes.
I didn't know if I should come, but I needed to say this while I still know how.
Jack stayed silent.
I'm tired, Jack. Tired of standing close but feeling far. Tired of reaching for something that never reaches back.
She wasn't angry, just worn down, gentle in her sadness.
You're here, but you're somewhere else. And I keep waiting for the version of you who lets me in, but maybe he doesn't exist.
Jack opened his mouth, then closed it again.
I love you, Jack. I think I always will. but I can't keep loving someone who won't let themselves be loved.
And maybe that's the hardest part. Not walking away, but still wanting to stay and having to go. She looked at him. One last time. No blame, no begging. Jack looked back. Really looked. And for the first time in too long, his eyes said more than his silence ever could. He didn't reach for her, but something in him did. A flicker, too late. A softness, too quiet to stop her. She turned, and the door closed behind her, not in anger, but in the kind of quiet that follows a goodbye long overdue, like someone choosing peace over hope. 3:27 a.m. Jack stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his apartment. The city blinked below, alive, indifferent. Behind him, silence. Around him, silence. Inside him, something breaking, quietly. Finally, he picked up his phone, opened notes, typed one line, deleted it, typed again. If I'm not the man who wins, then who the hell am I? Chapter 3. The Void. He sat on the edge of the bed in the penthouse he used to love. This was where he'd signed million-dollar deals, hosted Claire's birthday, rehearsed keynote speeches in front of the mirror. Now it felt like someone else's life had just been cleaned out of it, and he was the last thing left behind. The silence wasn't restful. It was raw. No phone buzzed, no urgent pings. His inbox, once overflowing by 7 a.m., now sat still, unread, unneeded. He tried checking Twitter. Nothing new. Not even hate, just indifference. He closed the app, paused, then opened it again, hovered. Delete account, click, confirm. Then Instagram, click, confirm. Then LinkedIn. Gone. Like cutting off limbs that had long gone numb. He stood and walked to the bathroom. The light flickered on, white and harsh. He looked into the mirror. The suit still hung on him right. His hair was in place, but something in his eyes was off, like someone had pulled the plug behind them. Jack Morgan, CEO, Forbes featured tech visionary, no longer existed. And if no one needed that man anymore, then maybe he didn't either. That night, he walked through the apartment, room by room. Kitchen, living, guest bedroom no one ever used. He wasn't saying goodbye. He was testing himself. Do I feel anything for this? A couch he'd bought in Milan, a sculpture Claire picked, a bottle of 30-year-old scotch from a client in Tokyo. He waited for a feeling, regret, nostalgia, something. Nothing came. That was the answer. The next morning, he called the broker.
I want it sold. Everything. As is.
He didn't ask about price. Didn't care about market timing. He just wanted it gone, like skin that no longer fit. He packed one bag, clothes, a laptop, his father's watch, and one photo, him at 12, standing stiffly in front of a science fair project, his dad's hand resting heavy on his shoulder, the only time Jack could remember being touched. He stared at that picture for a long time, then slipped it between two shirts without a word. On the fifth morning, Jack got into his Jeep and drove west. No plan, no GPS, only a direction. New York disappeared behind him in fragments. Bridge, skyline, the taste of burnt espresso. The farther he went, the quieter everything became. Except his mind. Day 2. Pennsylvania. Country roads. Empty diners. He kept driving, thinking movement would dull the ache. It didn't. It only made the ache real. He turned off the radio. The silence in the car made room for the noise in his head. He started thinking about things he hadn't touched in years. Not business, not Claire, but childhood. Wichita, 1998. A small kitchen, quiet dinners, perfect grades. His father reading the newspaper while Jack explained a science competition win. "You're smart. So what?" No smile, just a nod, like Jack had checked off another box. His mother only spoke when he made first place. Second place was met with dishes being cleared in silence. Love was something you earned. Praise was performance. Warmth was never guaranteed. So he built a life where he didn't have to ask for it. He built control, dominance, value. And it worked. Until it didn't. Now he was a man with no followers, no meetings, no purpose. And he didn't know whether to panic or feel relieved. Day 6, somewhere near Indiana. He parked next to a field, lay back in the driver's seat, and stared at a sky that felt too large for one man. "What do you do," he whispered, "with a life you don't recognize anymore?" He didn't cry, he didn't scream, there was just stillness, a kind of grief that didn't need noise. Day 7, gas station, middle of nowhere. He saw his reflection in the glass door, hoodie, unshaven face, hollow eyes. Not the man who built Apex Neural, just someone passing through. And he wondered, not for the first time, if I disappear, will anyone notice? And if not, does it even matter? He filled the tank, turned west again, not because he had somewhere to go, but because going was all he had left. The next morning, he called the broker.
I want it sold. Everything. As is.
He didn't ask about price, didn't care about market timing. He just wanted it gone, like skin that no longer fit. Chapter 4. American Wilderness. He kept driving, through Indiana, through the endless field of Iowa, where corn reached for sky like it believed something waited up there, through Nebraska, flat and wide and strangely quiet. The farther he went, the more the noise inside him began to thin, not disappear, not yet, but stretch, like something loosening. He didn't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was somewhere past mile marker 742, or maybe it was just the first time he looked out the window and didn't see concrete, didn't see screens, didn't see mirrors, just horizon. He stopped checking his phone, not by decision, he just forgot. There were no signals out here anyway, only wind, only sky, only a kind of silence that didn't demand or accuse or measure. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Morgan, the man who built a life out of being needed, didn't feel like a failure for not being wanted. He just felt small. The mountains arrived without warning. He'd seen photos of them, flown over them in private jets, once invested in a glamping resort on the edge of the Rockies, but none of that prepared him for what it felt like to actually be among them. The sheer scale, the immovable presence, the unapologetic silence of things that didn't care whether you'd ever been on the cover of anything. Out here, his resume meant nothing. His last name meant nothing. His bank account couldn't buy him a second more daylight or a shortcut through snow. It was terrifying. And, somehow, calming. On the second night in the mountains, he pulled over beside a frozen lake. The moon reflected off the surface like a sheet of breathless glass. He sat on the hood of his Jeep, arms around his knees, and let the cold in. Let the quiet in. He didn't pray, but he did listen. To what, he wasn't sure. Maybe just the fact that the world kept going, with or without him. He drove again the next morning, wheels crunching frost. No destination, just movement. By noon, the landscape began to change. The trees thinned, the air grew drier, the hills turned into long, sunburnt stretches of earth that seemed to whisper, "We were here before you, we'll be here after." Jack exhaled. It wasn't a sigh, more like surrender. Somewhere on the edge of Montana, the gas gauge dipped below empty. He hadn't noticed. The Jeep sputtered once, then gave up. Jack coasted it to the side of the dirt road and stepped out. No buildings, no cell service, no backup plan, just dry grass, wind, and miles of nothing in every direction. He stared down the road. Nothing moved. Then, maybe 15 minutes later, a dusty old pickup truck appeared over the hill like a mirage. Jack almost laughed. It felt made up. The truck slowed, stopped. A man stepped out, maybe in his late 60s, worn flannel, strong hands, sun-cracked face. Asked, "You stuck?" Jack hesitated, then nodded.
Ran out of gas.
The man looked at the Jeep, then back at Jack.
You got a can?
Jack blinked.
Wait, you don't have to...
"I know," the man said, no smile, no fuss. "But I can." Jack stood in silence. It had been years, literal years, since someone did something for him without an agenda. No pitch, no PR angle, no follow-up ask. Just a stranger. With a gas can, on a forgotten road. When it was done, the man replaced the cap and handed the can to Jack. He said, "You keep it. World's full of empty tanks." Jack looked at him, unsure how to respond.
Thank you.
"Thank you," was all he managed. The man nodded once, then got back in his truck and drove off. No name, no story, just gone. Jack stood there for a moment, holding the red gas can like it was something sacred. Then he looked around. The land stretched in every direction, rough, open, indifferent. And yet, for the first time in months, he didn't feel lost in it. He felt placed. Maybe he didn't need to be important. Maybe he just needed to be here. Not to prove, not to win, not to impress. Just to be. He got in the car, started the engine, let it idle for a while. And in that stillness, in that wild, endless quiet, he realized, not all noise comes from outside. Some of it was his. And maybe, just maybe, he was learning how to turn it down. Chapter 5. The Sign. The road curved without warning. No exit signs, no gas stations, no cell towers. Just a weather-worn wooden post pointing left. Stillwater, 6 miles. Jack almost missed it. He had no reason to turn, no plan. But something about the name stuck in his mind like a pebble in a shoe. Stillwater. It sounded impossible, like a place that shouldn't still exist. He turned. The town didn't announce itself. There were no billboards, no "Welcome to" arch, just an old railroad crossing, a few scattered houses, and a 2-lane main street that looked like it had been frozen in time sometime around 1973. Jack parked across from a corner cafe. White paint peeled gently from the window frames. Handwritten menu in chalk. No Wi-Fi sticker. No QR code. Just a real door with a real bell that made a small, real sound when he pushed it open. The inside smelled like coffee, cinnamon, and wood. Everything felt soft. Not plush. Soft in the way of things that have been touched 1,000 times by hands that never needed to hurry. There were only 3 people inside. An older couple, sitting side by side, reading 2 different books, but smiling at the same moment. And a woman behind the counter, maybe 40, maybe 50, with a gray braid and a face that didn't rush to smile. But did. Jack hesitated, unsure why he felt out of place in a room so calm. Then he saw it. A wooden sign above the counter. Simple lettering. Not flashy, not decorative, just true. Here, we don't rush happiness. He read it twice. Something about it made his chest tighten, not in pain, but in pressure, like his lungs had to recalibrate. He ordered coffee, sat by the window, watched the street. Nothing happened. No one ran. No one raised their voice. A dog wandered across the road. A teenage boy helped an old man with groceries. The sun moved an inch. That was it. Jack looked around the room. No one seemed to be in a hurry to leave, or prove anything, or explain themselves. They were just there, present, still, enough. He sipped his coffee. It wasn't the best he'd ever had, but it tasted like something made by someone who meant it. He stayed longer than he meant to. An hour passed, maybe more. He didn't check. He didn't want to. For the first time in years, time stopped measuring his worth. And he didn't mind. On his way out, the woman behind the counter caught his eye.
You passing through?
She asked, wiping a mug. Jack hesitated, then shrugged.
I thought I was, but now, I'm not so sure.
She smiled, this time slower, deeper.
Well,
She said, nodding toward the sign.
you're welcome to stay. We don't rush anything here, not even the decision to stay.
Jack smiled back, not forced, not polite, just honest. Outside, the wind had softened. The streets were still empty but didn't feel lonely. They felt waiting. Not for something dramatic, just for someone willing to see what was already there. Jack stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, and then, without fully realizing it, he exhaled. Slow, steady, real. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he wasn't moving toward something. He was letting something move toward him. Part 2. Stillness and Shift. Chapter 6. The Old Man and the Cabin. Jack didn't mean to stay. He told himself it was just another night in Stillwater, one more coffee, one more silent morning. Then he'd keep driving. But when he returned to the cafe the next day, the woman with the gray braid, her name was May, said something that made him stop mid-sip.
There's a man out near the woods.
She said, wiping her hands on a faded towel.
Goes by Walter. Keeps to himself, has a cabin. Could probably use an extra hand before winter sets in.
Jack raised an eyebrow.
And you're offering me? What, a job?
May shrugged.
Not a job, just something to do. Something honest.
Something honest. That word hung in the air like a quiet accusation. It took Jack 40 minutes to find the cabin. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to little more than trail. Pines gathered thick around a clearing where a one-room wooden structure leaned slightly into the earth. Not broken, just settled. Walter was outside chopping wood. Mid-70s, weather-beaten, white beard like old smoke. He didn't look up when Jack arrived. Jack cleared his throat.
May said you might need help.
The axe landed, clean. Walter didn't speak for a moment. Then,
You any good with your hands?
Jack hesitated.
I've built companies.
Walter looked up. His eyes were pale and still.
That's not what I asked.
Jack bristled. In his world, people knew his name before he entered the room. Here, it didn't even buy him a second glance.
I can learn.
He said, sharper than he meant. Walter nodded once.
You can stay. Spare cot in the back.
Jack blinked.
That's it? No questions? Nope. You work, you sleep. You don't, then you leave.
It wasn't kindness. It wasn't cruelty either. Just terms. The first night was cold. The cot creaked. The cabin smelled of pine, old firewood, and silence. Jack lay awake, listening to the wind knock softly at the windows. Part of him wanted to leave. The part that still clung to some sliver of pride. He wasn't used to being nothing. But something in him, something quieter, said, stay. The next morning, work began. Walter handed him gloves, then a shovel. No instruction, no praise, no good job. They dug, stacked, hauled, fixed. Hours passed like rivers, steady, wordless. At lunch, they ate in silence. Bread, cheese, water. At one point, Walter asked,
You ever done this before?
Jack shook his head.
No.
Walter grunted.
It shows.
By day 3, Jack's palms had blistered. His back ached, his ego more. He hated how useless he felt, how slow, how much he needed direction for things other men learned at 12. And yet, there was something real in the soreness, something honest in the sweat. No audience, no applause, just effort, and breath, and quiet. That night, as he sat by the fire, fingers still shaking, Jack looked over at Walter and asked,
Why let me stay? You didn't know me.
Walter didn't look up.
I still don't.
Jack waited. Then,
You're not curious?
Walter stirred the fire.
Respect isn't about what a man's done. It's how he shows up when no one's watching.
The words landed harder than Jack expected. Because for most of his life, someone had always been watching. And maybe that's what he'd really been building for. Not meaning, but mirrors. Now there were none. Just a cabin, a fire, and a man too old to care who Jack used to be. Chapter 7. The Tools. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. Walter's words echoed long after the fire had burned low. Respect isn't about what a man's done. It's how he shows up when no one's watching. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't cruel. That's what made it stick. Jack had spent his life showing up when everyone was watching. That was the point. To be seen, to impress, to win. But now, in this place of smoke and stillness, there was no one left to perform for. No investor, no audience, no mirror. Only Walter. And even he didn't care who Jack used to be. But Jack cared, and that, maybe, was enough. By dawn, he was already outside, waiting, not to be told, but to try. The handle was too rough, the weight uneven, the blade dull, but Jack held the axe anyway. His knuckles whitened with the grip. It wasn't anger, it was shame, the kind that doesn't shout, only simmers. Walter had handed it to him without a word, just pointed at the stack of uncut logs, then disappeared into the trees. Jack stood alone with the tool, the task, and the quiet judgment of the woods. He swung, missed, swung again, too shallow, again, too high, again, too slow. By the 7th swing, his shoulders ached. By the 10th, his pride did. He had learned how to move money, scale companies, dominate markets, but not this, not pine, not cold air, not humility. In the city, tools were metaphors, pitch decks, algorithms, leverage. Here, they were solid, silent, and unforgiving. At noon, he dropped the axe and sat down in the dirt. His palms were raw, his breath short, his mind louder than the woods. A part of him wanted to stand up, walk back to the cabin, and disappear again. But another part, smaller but steadier, whispered, "Stay in it." Not out of pride, but because this was no longer about proving something. It was about rebuilding something that had broken inside him long before his company fell. Walter returned near sunset. He looked at the pile, 4 logs clumsily split, then at Jack, sweat-drenched, blistered, frustrated.
You trying to kill it or cut it?
Walter asked, not unkindly.
Jack didn't answer. Couldn't.
Walter sat beside him on a stump. From his coat, he pulled a small sharpening stone, smooth, gray, old as the trees.
This,
He said, holding it up.
is what makes the blade work. Not just strength, edge.
He handed it to Jack. Jack turned it in his hand like it was something alive.
You don't need more force.
Walter said.
You need more care.
Jack looked down. Those words landed somewhere deeper than his hands. He realized That had been his life. More force, more hours, more pressure. Every time something resisted, he'd pushed harder. But he had never sharpened anything. Not a blade, not a skill, not himself. That night, by firelight, Jack sat alone with the axe and the stone. He ran the blade across the grit, slowly. Again. Again. The sound was soft, steady, like sanding down his own impatience. There was no victory in it, no breakthrough. Just a man learning how to take care of something, even if that thing was just a tool and a version of himself he hadn't met before. He didn't split more wood that night, but something inside him began to shift. He wasn't just learning how to cut. He was learning how to stop breaking. Chapter 8. The Storm. The next day started quiet, like most of them did now. The axe was sharper, his hands steadier, the air colder. Jack had begun to move with the rhythm of things. Wake, work, wood, silence, fire. No rush, no scoreboard, no algorithm, just routine. And for once, he didn't resent it. Walter said little that morning, only handed him rope, pointed toward the shed roof, and muttered, "Tie it down. Wind's coming." The clouds hadn't rolled in yet, but Jack had learned not to argue with a man who listened better to the land than any forecast. He climbed the ladder, secured the tarp, twice, then again. He'd never tied anything that mattered before. Now the knots felt like a promise, if not to Walter, then to the version of himself who didn't walk away when things got hard. By mid-afternoon, the wind had found them. It didn't knock first. It arrived in full, sharp, fast, hungry. Branches groaned. The trees began to argue with the sky. Walter was chopping wood when the gust hit. He turned at the sound of something cracking, a limb, too high, too fast. Jack saw it before Walter did. Didn't think, just moved. He tackled the old man sideways, hard, both of them hitting the frozen ground as the limb crashed where Walter had just stood. Silence, then coughing. Jack's ears rang.
You good?
He shouted, his voice hoarse. Walter groaned.
Damn shoulder.
Jack helped him sit up, checked his arms, his legs, shook his head.
You need a doctor. There isn't one nearby. Still.
They stumbled toward the cabin, shielding themselves from the rain now slanting in at full angle. Inside, Jack wrapped Walter's arm with what cloth he could find. It wasn't pretty, but it held. They didn't speak for a while, just the sound of fire being coaxed back to life, the storm hammering against the roof. Jack sat across from him, hands black with mud, eyes wide with something he couldn't name. Not fear, not pride. Something simpler. He was here. That mattered. Walter finally spoke, voice low.
You didn't have to do that. I know.
Walter looked at him for longer than usual.
Why'd you?
Jack didn't answer right away. He thought about the question, not what it demanded, but what it revealed. Because the truth was, he didn't move because he was brave. He moved because, for once, he didn't calculate the cost. He wasn't trying to save anyone, to be a hero. He just showed up, like Walter said. And when he finally spoke, he only said,
Because I was there.
Walter didn't nod, didn't smile, but something in his shoulders let go. A thread loosened. Jack felt it too. That night, the storm grew wilder. The wind howled like it remembered every name it had ever taken, but inside the cabin, the fire stayed lit. Two men sat quiet, neither alone, and for the first time, Jack didn't wonder what came next. He was here. That was enough. Chapter 9. The Letter. 3 days after the storm, the land breathed again. The trees no longer bent. The wind had moved on, and Jack. He wasn't sure what had changed inside him, only that something had, and it wasn't going back. Walter's shoulder was healing, slowly, stiffly. Their days returned to routine, small talk, smaller gestures. But now the silence between them felt different. Not distance, but a kind of trust that didn't need explaining. Jack no longer filled empty space with thoughts of who he used to be. He split wood, he fixed things, he slept. Sometimes he caught himself smiling at nothing in particular. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was no longer pain. He was hauling firewood back from the edge of the forest when he saw May waiting at the fence. She had something in her hands. An envelope. Worn. Folded. Handwritten. Jack paused.
Someone came by.
May said simply.
Didn't give a name. Drove a rental. Plates from out of state.
She handed him the envelope. No return address. No message. Just one word on the front. Jack. Before she spoke again, Jack already knew who it was from. Claire. The way his name was written. Like it wasn't a label, but a memory. May hesitated, then said quietly,
She didn't ask to see you. Just ask me to give you that. If you'd take it.
Jack didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. Something unspoken lodged in his chest. Not anger, not hope. Just pressure. May lingered a second longer.
She said she heard about Stillwater from someone you used to work with. Something about a guy who mentioned Montana in a podcast. She followed a thread, then a photo, then a story from a traveler who stopped for coffee. Took her months to find a name that wasn't on any list.
Jack blinked.
She said if you wanted to disappear, you did a damn good job of it. But she didn't come to drag you back. She just wanted to leave something behind.
May paused, then added.
She smiled when I told her you'd changed.
Jack stood there for a long moment, staring at the letter. He didn't open it. Not because he was afraid of what was inside, but because something about holding it already said enough. He carried it back to the cabin, slipped it into his coat pocket, kept it there as he fixed the wood pile, as he boiled stew, as he lit the fire. That night, after Walter had gone to bed, Jack sat by the hearth and unfolded the envelope. He didn't expect forgiveness. He expected something colder. A closing remark, maybe. A final boundary. But what he found was softer. Claire's handwriting. Gentle. Even. Still her.
Jack, I didn't know if I should write, or if it would help, or hurt. But I didn't want the last words between us to be silence. I heard about you, not from a headline, but from someone you helped once, years ago. Your name came up in a story that had nothing to do with the fall. Just a moment where you showed up for someone. That's how I followed you. Not with data, but with stories. One by one, thread by thread. Coffee shops, road stops, until someone said, Stillwater. He went that way. But I didn't come to find you, not really. I came to give you back something, your voice. I walked away when you needed someone to stay. Maybe I was afraid, or proud, or just didn't know how to hold what was breaking. But leaving didn't save me. It just made everything quieter and colder. But I don't blame you. I never really did. Wherever you are, whoever you're becoming, I hope you know you don't have to earn love, or rest, or your own peace. You can just have it. You can just be. Claire.
Jack read it once, then again. He didn't cry, didn't shatter, but a part of him, a tightly wound piece he hadn't touched in years, unclenched. She had seen him, even now. Even after all of it, she had not asked him to return, only reminded him that he never had to keep running. He folded the letter slowly, slipped it back into the envelope, then placed it between the pages of the field journal Walter gave him for chores. It belonged there. Her words beside work, memory beside motion, not in conflict, but in rhythm. Later that night, Jack stepped outside. The air was sharp and the stars were loud with light. He looked up, said nothing, didn't make a wish. He just stood there, still and finally enough. Chapter 10. The Mirror. The morning after the letter, Jack rose before the fire died, not because he had to, but because he couldn't stay still anymore. Something in him had settled, something else had stirred. He stepped outside with the journal under his arm, the one Claire's letter now lived in. The cold didn't bite the way it used to. It just reminded him he was here, alive. Walter found him splitting wood an hour later.
Didn't think I'd see you up this early on your day off.
Jack shrugged. Didn't feel like resting. Walter nodded, said nothing more, but his gaze lingered. He could see it. Something had shifted in the boy's posture. Less tension, less proving, more presence. Later that day, Jack wandered into town. Not for errands, just to walk, to notice. Stillwater was small, but it breathed. People moved slower here, but they saw each other, not just with eyes, with time. He passed May's cafe. She gave him a nod through the glass, then turned back to her customer without waving. It wasn't cold. It was respectful, like she understood. Today, he wasn't looking to be seen, just to keep walking. He ended up near the old general store, where a dusty window reflected more than products. He caught his own reflection. It startled him, not because it looked unfamiliar, but because it didn't try to look anything. No suit, no badge of status, no mask of exhaustion. Just a man in worn boots and a wool coat, bearded, quiet, upright, and still. Jack stepped closer to the window. For the first time, he didn't flinch. He looked straight at himself, and instead of judgment, he felt something simpler, not pride, not shame, just permission. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of starting over, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. From a place not of failure, but of choice. That night he wrote in the journal, not a to-do list, not a pitch, just a line. When you stop trying to fix who you were, you finally make space for who you are. He closed the book, let the fire burn low, and went to bed, not because he was exhausted, but because he was whole enough to rest. The days grew cooler. Stillwater slid gently toward the edge of fall. Jack began waking, not to alarms or deadlines, but to birds, wind, and a kind of quiet belonging. He no longer needed permission to help, he just helped. That morning, he noticed the roof on May's porch sagging. By noon, he was on a ladder with new shingles Walter had stashed years ago. He didn't ask if she wanted it fixed. She didn't ask why he was doing it. She just brought him lemonade and said,
You missed a spot.
He smiled.
Not yet.
They left it at that. In the afternoons, he started cooking, stews, flatbreads, things that filled the cabin with real warmth. Walter never complimented anything directly, but he stopped adding salt, and that was enough. The boy with the bike, his name was Milo, began stopping by after school. Not for help, just to talk. About frogs, and aliens, and whether or not birds dream. Jack didn't correct him. He just listened. One evening, Jack walked down past the tree line to where the land opened wide. There he sat on a rock and watched the sun go down behind the hills. The sky didn't rush to fade. It unraveled slowly, orange to gold, then bruised lavender. Jack watched until the last streak of light gave way to the first star, and he felt not awe, but alignment. Not that the world was perfect, but that for once, he wasn't outside of it. That night, by the fire, Walter poured them each a small glass of something sharp and quiet. They didn't toast, they just sat. The logs hissed and cracked. The stars above blinked like old friends. Then, without turning his head, Walter asked,
If you died tomorrow, what would you regret most?
Jack didn't answer right away. The question didn't come like a blow. It came like a mirror. He thought of boardrooms, of missed birthdays, of Claire's letter. He thought of how long he'd let himself live like a weapon, sharpened for a war that never ended. And then, softly, honestly,
Not living true, and not letting the person I loved know that I did.
Walter nodded once.
Took me until 60 to figure that one out.
They fell into silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning, made of ember and breath. Part 3. Reconnection and Return. Chapter 11. The Call. On a quiet weekend morning, Jack sat in May's cafe, sipping his coffee and soaking in a bit of warmth against the crisp chill in the air. The smell of cinnamon and old wood lingered in the air. Outside, frost clung to the windows, but inside felt untouched by the world. May hummed behind the counter, wiping a tray. Milo was at his usual spot, tongue out, focused on a crayon spaceship. Then the radio cracked. Soft at first, just static. Then a voice broke through.
This is WNOI News. Breaking this hour, a critical failure in patient monitoring systems has hit Lenox health facilities across 3 New York hospitals. Preliminary reports indicate a back-end patch, pushed live late Friday, triggered widespread data feed disruptions. Sources confirm that ICU staff at Midtown General failed to receive vitals for nearly 9 minutes during an overnight shift. 1 cardiac arrest has been reported, condition currently critical. The system involved was originally designed under former Lenox CEO Jack Morgan, who resigned last year amid internal disputes. In a brief statement, Lenox leadership called the incident deeply regrettable and said they are urgently exploring all options, including reaching out to Mr. Morgan and his original engineering team.
The radio fell silent. Just a soft click as the announcer's voice faded, like even the static knew better than to follow that. The cafe didn't erupt. No gasps, no dropped mugs. It stayed exactly as it was. But Jack wasn't the same. He hadn't moved, but something in him had. Like a string pulled taut deep in his chest. His fingers loosened on the mug. He set it down, slowly with both hands, as if it might spill something more than coffee. May had stopped wiping the counter. She didn't say anything, just looked. Not shocked, not nosy, just watching. Like she understood silence better than words. Milo's crayon hung in midair. He stared at Jack, wide-eyed, then quietly went back to coloring. Jack didn't speak, didn't blink. His breath was steady, but his eyes had lost the room, focused somewhere far beyond the frost-covered glass, somewhere back in the world he'd left behind, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like it had let him go. Jack stepped outside the cafe. The cold touched his skin, but the voice on the phone reached deeper. Ethan's voice was tight, hoarse, like he hadn't slept.
Jack, it's happening again.
Jack didn't answer.
We rolled out a patch Friday night. Compliance pressure. Too fast. Vitals data froze across multiple sites. 3 hospitals, 1 patient coded. Teenage girl. ICU. We're not sure if she'll make it.
Silence.
The team can't isolate the failure point. And frankly, no one left here really understands the core anymore. You wrote half that architecture from scratch.
Still nothing from Jack.
Look,
Ethan's voice cracked a little.
I know I didn't speak up for you. I know. But I'm not calling to clean reputations. I'm calling because someone's daughter might die. And there will be more. Unless we fix what's still broken. The truth is, we don't have anyone left who knows how to hold this thing together. And the one person who understands it from the inside out is you. We need you. Not the title, not the PR fix. You.
Jack didn't speak. Not at first. The line had gone quiet, but Ethan didn't hang up. Neither did Jack. He just stood there, the phone still to his ear, though the voice was gone. Like he wasn't ready to put the silence down yet. The girl. 9 minutes. No vitals. No oxygen data. No alert. Just silence, where a scream should have been. 9 minutes. That's long enough for brain damage. Long enough for a chance to vanish. He imagined the room. ICU lights. Beeping machines. Except this time, the machines said nothing. The nurse didn't see. Not because she failed. Because the system did. And now, that girl's pulse. It might never come back. Jack closed his eyes. He saw a white hallway, the beeping of monitors, a young man's hand going still. And he saw himself, a year ago, standing in a boardroom full of suits, pretending they knew what empathy looked like. His grip on the phone tightened, then loosened. He looked toward the horizon. The pine trees didn't move. The sky said nothing. Finally, he spoke, but not into the phone.
Damn you, Ethan.
Jack said softly.
You always knew the one thing I couldn't ignore.
Then he hung up and stood there, longer than he needed to, because once you take the first step back toward a fire, you don't get to pretend you don't feel the heat. Chapter 12. The Return. The road back wasn't mapped. Jack didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note. He only left a few words with May.
Tell Walter I'll pay him back for the roof.
May didn't smile, didn't frown. She just looked at him for a second, long enough to say she understood, without saying anything at all. Then she reached under the counter, pulled out a small paper bag, 2 sandwiches, a flask of coffee, and a note that just said, "Don't forget who you are now." She handed it to him without another word. It wasn't dramatic, no music swelled, the trees didn't bow. Milo kept drawing, unfazed. But something had shifted. In Jack, around him. He drove east, through dawn and into city noise. Montana faded behind him like a soft breath. The skyline of Manhattan returned like a fist he used to clench. At Linex, everything felt colder. The reception desk had changed, so had the faces. People walked past him like he was a stranger, and he supposed he was. Ethan met him at the elevator. No tie, dark circles under his eyes. They didn't shake hands.
You look worse,
Jack said.
And you look not like a ghost, which is something.
It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't ice either. In the war room, they spoke in technical terms. Server maps, packet loss, route tracing. Jack listened more than he talked. His name was mentioned with a cautious kind of reverence, like a saint who had also once burned the church down. Then someone said, "She's stable, the girl." Jack exhaled, long and slow.
We got lucky,
Ethan added.
Don't mistake luck for architecture,
Jack said quietly. Hours passed. Jack didn't fix the system. He rewrote how they looked at it. He asked questions no one had asked in months. He deleted things others were afraid to touch. He restored redundancies that had been cut to save budget. Not with bravado, with clarity. At some point, someone brought him coffee. It didn't taste like maize. When the room emptied out near midnight, Jack stayed behind, staring at a wall of code. He didn't feel triumphant, just tired. and strangely grounded. Ethan came back in. "You could stay," he said. Jack shook his head.
I won't go back to what it was.
Ethan hesitated. "What will you do then?" Jack looked at the code one last time.
Something better.
Chapter 13. The Quiet Between. Jack didn't go back to Montana right away. He left the Lennox building past midnight, coat slung over one shoulder, the cold biting less than he expected. The city hadn't changed, but his eyes had. For once, it didn't feel like something to conquer. He walked. Just walked. No destination, no phone calls. Just blocks of silence and breath. When the sun rose, he found himself near the river. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that held no drama, just a soft, tired light. He sat on a bench, coffee in hand, the same paper bag May had given him now folded neatly in his coat pocket. He didn't think about systems, or failure, or saving anything. He thought about the girl. 9 minutes. He thought about Walter's silence, Milo's crayons, May's note. He thought about who he'd been, who he still might be. He didn't cry, but something inside him settled, like silt after a storm. For the first time, Jack wasn't chasing or fleeing. He was just in between. And in that quiet space, he found the one thing he'd been missing all along. Not the answer, but the room to ask better questions. Chapter 14. The Letter Again. The envelope was waiting when Jack returned to the cabin. No postage stamp, just his name written in careful ink. It was Claire's handwriting. He knew before he opened it. The first time she wrote, it had felt like a whisper from a life too far away. This time, it landed differently. He wasn't running anymore. He took the letter out onto the porch, the late autumn light stretching thin across the clearing. He didn't rush. He read slowly, like listening.
Jack, you don't have to write back. You don't even have to forgive me. But there are things I want you to know. I was angry too, back then. But not at you, not really. I was angry that we didn't know how to be human together. That success gave us everything except each other. You once told me silence was your way of surviving. I didn't understand that until recently. Now, I think I do. Stillwater is not where I thought you'd go. But somehow it makes sense. And if you're still there, I'd like to see it. Not to talk about the past, just to see where you are now. I don't know what we are to each other anymore, but I know I want peace with you, even if it's quiet and from a distance. If you're willing, I'll come on the first snow. Claire.
Jack folded the letter. Not tightly, not like something to hide, just enough to hold its shape. He looked out at the trees, now barer than before. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. He didn't smile, but his chest ached less. First snow. That wasn't far off. Chapter 15. The Thaw. Snow came early. It wasn't a storm, just a hush, a quieting of the world. The pines wore it like memory. The roof of the cabin gathered white in soft surrender. Jack spent the day chopping wood, not because he had to, because it kept his hands busy, his thoughts paced. He repaired a loose shutter, scraped frost from the steps, hauled kindling inside. The kind of work that asked nothing but presence. He didn't think about Claire, or the letter, or whether she would come. But he also didn't not think about them. When the sun dropped, he lit the fireplace, boiled water for tea. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It had shape. He picked up the book Walter had left behind months ago, something about trees and silence. He read 3 pages, then he just sat. Snow tapped the windows, soft and steady. And in that hush, memory returned. Not in waves, but in small, dry truths. The boardroom. The silence after the fall. The words from her last letter circled back, quiet but insistent. I don't blame you. I never really did. He hadn't known how badly he needed that line. Not until it echoed now, in the fire's glow, in the stillness of this place that never asked for more than his being. Maybe she didn't blame him. Maybe now, he could stop blaming himself, too. Chapter 16. First Snow. Jack didn't mark the day, but when he opened the door that morning, snow had fallen overnight. Not heavy, but real. A thin white blanket softened everything. The porch, the pines, even the air felt quieter. He brewed coffee, split kindling, fed the fire. The motions were the same, but something in the rhythm had shifted. Not urgency, expectancy. Mid-morning, he heard tires on packed snow. A soft crunch. He stepped onto the porch. The sky was pale and low. The car door opened before he could see the license plate. And then she was there. No suitcase, no umbrella. Just Claire in a gray coat, arms wrapped around herself, breath visible in the cold. They didn't move for a second. Then Jack stepped down, boots pressing into the snow.
It came,
She said softly, looking at the sky. Jack followed her gaze. Flakes still drifted down, catching in her hair. He said,
Yeah, it did.
She didn't smile. Not exactly, but her eyes didn't look away. Neither did his.
You want to come in?
He asked. She nodded once. He held the door. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Morgan let someone in. Not just into the cabin, but into the quiet he'd spent so long learning to live with. Chapter 17. Firelight. The kettle whistled low. Jack poured water into 2 mugs, set them on the table. He didn't ask how she liked her tea. Claire didn't offer, and somehow it fit. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them. The cabin creaked in the quiet. Outside, snow thickened.
it's smaller than I pictured.
Claire said, glancing around.
It used to feel too big at first.
Jack replied. She nodded, picked up her mug, let the heat touch her hands. Scene said.
I almost didn't come.
I almost didn't stay.
He answered. A pause. Then Claire smiled. The kind that didn't rise to her cheeks, but warmed her voice.
We were always good at missing each other.
Jack looked at the fire.
Maybe we were always aiming too high, or looking too far ahead.
He didn't argue. Neither did she. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. No rush to fill the air.
It doesn't have to be anything.
Claire said at last. Jack looked at her.
I didn't come to fix us or to rewrite anything.
She set the mug down.
I just wanted to see who you were now. In stillness. Not in success, not in collapse, just here?
Jack didn't speak right away. He studied her face, softer now, less defended.
Then stay a while.
He said quietly. Claire didn't answer with words. She just leaned back into the chair and let the silence hold them both. Chapter 18. Morning Light. Claire stayed. Not with declarations, not with promises, just with presence. She slept on the old daybed by the stove, tucked under layers of quilts Jack had almost forgotten he owned. In the morning, he made eggs. She made toast. No one said who would do what. It just happened. They walked the snowy path behind the cabin, boots crunching in sync.
You know,
Claire said, hands deep in her coat pockets.
I don't think I ever asked if you liked being a CEO.
Jack paused. Not because the question was hard, but because no one had ever asked it that way.
I liked building things,
He said.
not being watched building them.
Claire nodded.
I used to like watching you, but then I realized I didn't really see you, just the version you were showing.
They stopped at a bend in the path. The trees opened slightly, revealing a wide sweep of white meadow. A rabbit darted across. Claire smiled.
I used to think peace was boring.
And now?
Now I think maybe I was afraid of what I'd find if I slowed down.
Jack didn't answer right away. He picked up a handful of snow, let it melt in his palm.
It's easier to run fast than to stand still and feel something,
He said. She didn't say anything back. They just stood there, two people who had failed once at being close, now succeeding at being still. Side by side. Not trying, just there. Something simple. They cooked together that night, nothing fancy, just soup. Carrots, onion, broth, and patience. Claire chopped while Jack stirred. It wasn't choreography, but it moved like one. Quiet harmony.
You ever think about going back?
Claire asked. Jack didn't look up.
Sometimes,
She waited.
not to what it was,
He added.
but maybe something smaller, more honest, fewer layers.
Claire nodded.
Something that breathes. Something that doesn't need to shout to matter.
They ate at the small table by the window. No candles, just firelight and the occasional hiss of snow melting on the chimney. Claire told him about a writing program she'd heard about in Oregon. Jack listened. He told her about the solar battery he finally figured out how to fix. She smiled. They didn't speak in resolutions, only in maybes, and when she reached for the bowl to refill his soup, their fingers touched, just briefly, but they stayed there, neither moving. The fire popped. Something settled. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, something quiet and brave began again. Chapter 20. Homecoming. The call came a week later. Not from Ethan. From the hospital. The girl made it. Stabilized. Awake. Breathing on her own. Her mother asked someone to tell Jack thank you. He didn't know what to do with that. Claire found him on the porch, still holding the phone. He hadn't moved in 5 minutes.
You okay?
She asked. He nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. She didn't press, just stepped closer, leaned her shoulder into his. That night they sat by the fire and said nothing. The next morning, Jack took out the old backpack, the one he'd left behind the day he drove west. He packed light. Claire raised an eyebrow.
Leaving again?
Just visiting?
You know you don't owe them anything.
I know.
He zipped the bag, slung it over his shoulder, then looked at her. Really looked.
But I might have something left to give.
Claire didn't argue. She handed him a scarf, the gray one. Hers.
Take this. You forget your own.
Jack smiled.
You sure?
She leaned in, kissed his cheek.
You're not the only one who knows how to give.
He stepped outside. The snow had begun to melt. Not all at once, but enough to show the road again. Epilogue. Stillwater spring came slowly, the kind that doesn't announce itself with blossoms, but with thawed earth and soft footsteps. Claire stayed. Not permanently, not with labels, but with enough presence to matter. Jack returned to New York for 3 weeks, just enough to help Linux rebuild what it broke. He didn't take a title, didn't hold a press conference. You sat with engineers, wrote code, cleaned messes, quietly. When he came back to Stillwater, no one asked where he'd been. Walter handed him a hammer. May handed him cafe. Milo showed him a drawing of a spaceship and said, "I saved you a chair." Jack smiled, because for once, he didn't feel like he had to earn any of it. Claire took the writing program. They didn't talk every hour, they didn't need to. Some evenings, she read aloud what she wrote. Jack listened, sometimes with eyes closed. The cabin stayed small, the road stayed quiet. But something in Jack widened. Not his resume, his life. Stillwater wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Jack Morgan, that was enough. More than enough. You've just finished listening to Where the Noise Stops. A quiet story, but maybe not a small one. A story about where the noise ends. Where the names, titles, status, success, timelines, to-do lists, and notifications all fade. And when it collapses, we think we've lost everything. But maybe we haven't. Maybe what we lose was never really ours. And what's left, what stays, is what's always been quietly waiting. A breath, a voice, a hand that didn't let go. A moment when we stop running and remember how it feels to simply be. Not perfect, not admired, not even strong. Just honest. Still. Here. That's where the noise stops, and where life finally begins. Thank you for spending this time, for listening not just to the words, but to the silences in between. If this story moved something in you, let it stay with you a little longer. And if you'd like to hear more quiet stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this with someone who might need a pause too. This is The Pause. Until next time, stay quiet, stay kind, stay real.